Bruce Lee reached across the desk and took Chuck Norris's wrist without warning, his eyes closing in total concentration, and within 3 seconds his expression had shifted from casual conversation to genuine alarm. Several people present later described this exact sequence as unfolding with a speed and a precision that left almost no time for anyone else in the studio to fully register what was actually happening before Lee had already completed his rapid diagnostic assessment. It was September 19th, 1972, and earlier that evening, before a studio audience of 300 people at NBC Studios in Burbank, Bruce Lee interrupted a lighthearted conversation about martial arts choreography to ask Chuck Norris a question that had nothing to do with fighting technique and everything to do with whether Norris had seen a doctor recently. Coming up, exactly what Bruce Lee sensed in Chuck Norris's body that night, the specific and rare heart condition it revealed, and the real story of a friendship forged through genuine mutual respect on the set of one of the most famous fight scenes in cinema history. A friendship that may have saved Chuck Norris's life before either of them ever left that studio. But before we dive in, I see messages all the time in the comment section that some of you didn't realize you weren't subscribed. So if you could do me a favor and double-check if you're a subscriber to this channel, that would be tremendously appreciated. It's simple, it's free, and it's something anybody who watches this show frequently can do to help us keep everything going. Please do double-check if you've subscribed, and thank you so much, because in a strange way, you're part of our history, and you're on this journey with us, and I appreciate you for that. Now let's go back and understand exactly what brought these two men to that exact moment, because what Bruce Lee did on that stage was not some kind of mystical parlor trick. It came from years of a specific and rigorous training discipline that had taught him to read the human body with a precision that trained physicians sometimes found genuinely difficult to match. Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris first met in the late 1960s through the competitive American martial arts tournament circuit, where both men had built considerable reputations as genuinely formidable fighters, Norris as a champion karate competitor with an undefeated record across several years, Lee as the founder of his own increasingly influential martial arts philosophy. Their initial encounters at various tournament events across the country established a mutual professional recognition well before either man's eventual career trajectory would bring them together for their most famous collaborative work, each having heard considerably about the other's reputation within the relatively close-knit competitive martial arts community that existed in America during this specific period. Their professional relationship deepened considerably in 1972, when Lee cast Norris as his opponent in the climactic fight scene of Way of the Dragon, a sequence filmed in Rome's Colosseum that would eventually become one of the most celebrated and most closely studied fight sequences in the entire history of martial arts cinema. The specific circumstances of this casting decision deserve fuller documentation, because they illustrate exactly how deliberately Lee selected Norris for this particular and considerably significant role. Lee had, by this point in his career, achieved sufficient creative control over his own productions to select opponents based on genuine skill and genuine screen presence rather than simple studio convenience, and his choice of Norris specifically reflected his own considerable respect for Norris's technical abilities and his own conviction that only a genuinely formidable opponent could produce the specific dramatic tension the climactic sequence required. This casting decision, according to people involved in the production, represented a genuine compliment from one elite practitioner to another, an acknowledgement that Norris possessed exactly the caliber of skill Lee's own considerable reputation required for a convincing cinematic confrontation. Norris himself later described feeling genuinely honored by this specific selection, understanding, even before their friendship fully developed, exactly what this professional endorsement meant coming from someone whose own considerable skill he already deeply respected. What almost nobody in the general American public fully understood was the specific depth of respect and specific personal friendship that developed between these two men during the demanding weeks of filming that particular sequence, a friendship built on considerably more than professional collaboration. Norris himself, in numerous later interviews across the following decades, described Lee as one of the most genuinely influential people in his entire life, crediting him directly with fundamentally reshaping his own understanding of martial arts philosophy, pushing him to think about combat not simply as a competitive sport, but as a genuine and continuous path of personal development. Norris elaborated on this specific influence in considerable detail across multiple later interviews, describing extended conversations with Lee during which the two men discussed martial arts philosophy well beyond ordinary technical instruction, exploring questions of personal discipline, mental focus, and the specific relationship between physical training and broader personal development. He said that these conversations fundamentally altered his own understanding of what genuine mastery actually required, shifting his perspective from a primarily competitive framework focused on tournament victories and championship titles toward a considerably more philosophical and considerably more holistic approach to lifelong martial arts practice. Quick reminder before we continue, because this next part of the story matters enormously. If you're enjoying this so far, take just a second to hit that like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect moment, because what happens next may have saved Chuck Norris's life. The specific texture of their friendship during this period deserves fuller understanding, because it illuminates exactly how genuine and how immediate the bond between them actually was. Despite technically being adversaries on screen, Lee and Norris spent considerable time together off-camera during the Rome production, training together during breaks in filming, and discussing martial arts philosophy late into the evening with a specific intensity that crew members present, described as evidence of two genuinely serious practitioners who had finally found someone capable of matching their own considerable dedication. The specific demands of filming on location in Rome deserve fuller documentation because they illustrate exactly what circumstances brought Lee and Norris into such close and sustained daily contact throughout the production. The Colosseum sequence required weeks of careful choreography and repeated filming to achieve the exact visual precision Lee demanded for the final cut, a demanding schedule that placed both men in each other's company for considerably longer stretches than an ordinary supporting role might have required. Crew members present throughout this extended period consistently described the specific and genuine camaraderie that developed between the two men, noting that their off-camera friendship seemed, if anything, to enhance rather than undermine the convincing on-screen intensity of their eventual cinematic confrontation. Norris later described these conversations as some of the most intellectually significant of his entire career, describing Lee's particular approach to martial arts, treating it as fluid and adaptable rather than rigidly bound by any single tradition, as directly influential on his own subsequent teaching philosophy. He specifically recalled Lee's frequent emphasis on discarding whatever proved genuinely ineffective in actual practice, regardless of how deeply that particular technique or principle was embedded within established martial arts tradition. A specific intellectual openness that Norris said fundamentally challenged and ultimately reshaped his own previously more conventional approach to martial arts instruction across the remainder of his own considerable teaching career. Bruce Lee's own particular sensitivity to physical and energetic signals in the human body, the specific skill he would eventually demonstrate so dramatically on Johnny Carson's stage, developed across years of intensive martial arts training that emphasized an unusually precise awareness of physiological detail. The specific origins of this particular sensitivity deserve fuller understanding, because they illustrate exactly how systematically Lee had developed this considerable skill across his own extensive training. Lee had studied multiple traditional martial arts systems throughout his life, several of which incorporated specific instruction in reading an opponent's physical state, pulse quality, breathing rhythm, subtle shifts in balance and coordinations, skills traditionally taught as essential tools for anticipating an opponent's next movement in actual combat. Lee's own considerable intellectual curiosity led him to study these traditional teachings with unusual depth and unusual seriousness, treating them not simply as combat tactics, but as a genuinely rigorous discipline worthy of the same careful study he brought to every other aspect of his extensive martial arts practice. Lee had studied, across his considerable training, various traditional approaches to reading subtle physical signals, pulse quality, skin color, breathing patterns, and minor variations in coordinations, skills that traditional martial arts philosophy connected directly to combat effectiveness, but that also, as Lee himself understood and occasionally discussed, carried genuine diagnostic value when applied outside strictly combative contexts. This specific and unusual breadth of study distinguished Lee even among his own considerably accomplished peers within the competitive martial arts community of that era. Johnny Carson had booked both Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris for the same broadcast to discuss the considerable critical success of Way of the Dragon and its famous Coliseum fight sequence, an appearance built around warm and largely technical conversation about martial arts choreography and the specific challenges of filming such an elaborate sequence. Carson himself had genuine personal fascination with both performers, having followed the considerable critical and commercial success of Lee's recent films with genuine interest, and understanding the particular cultural significance of featuring two of the world's most skilled martial artists on the same broadcast discussing a fight sequence that had already generated considerable discussion among film critics and martial arts enthusiasts alike. Carson's production team anticipated this particular joint appearance would produce exactly the kind of technically fascinating and visually compelling conversation that would genuinely engage audiences curious about the considerable skill underlying the sequence's dramatic impact. The taping began exactly as anticipated, Lee and Norris trading warm and genuinely respectful stories about their collaboration, the studio audience delighting in watching two of the most skilled martial artists in the world discuss their craft with obvious mutual admiration. Nothing in these opening minutes suggested any indication of the genuinely significant diagnostic intervention that would soon transform the entire tenor of the broadcast. Roughly 13 minutes into the conversation, Carson, with entirely innocent curiosity, asked Norris a lighthearted question about how he maintained his own considerable physical conditioning between competitive tournaments and film productions. This particular question emerged naturally from the broader conversation's earlier drift toward the demanding physical requirements of the Coliseum fight sequence, a topic Carson had raised with genuine and entirely ordinary curiosity, rather than any specific anticipation of the significant revelation it would soon unexpectedly produce. Do not miss what happens next, because it is the moment this entire story has been building toward. As Norris began answering, describing his usual training regimen with the same easy confidence that had characterized his entire appearance, Bruce Lee's expression shifted with a specific and sudden intensity that several people present immediately recognized as genuinely different from ordinary conversational attention. Several people present described this specific transformation in considerable detail, noting that Lee's entire demeanor shifted within a matter of seconds from relaxed conversational engagement into something considerably more focused and considerably more clinical, an intensity that several crew members later compared to watching Lee prepare for genuine combat rather than simply listening to an ordinary television interview response. This sudden shift, occurring with no apparent external trigger that anyone else in the studio could immediately identify, produced a specific and growing unease among those present who understood, even before Lee spoke again, that something significant had captured his complete attention. Lee interrupted, politely but firmly, asking Norris directly whether he had experienced any unusual fatigue or any specific irregularity in his breathing during recent training sessions. The specific directness of this interruption, occurring mid-sentence rather than waiting for any natural pause in the conversation, itself signaled to several people present that Lee considered whatever he had detected too urgent to delay addressing even briefly. Norris, according to everyone present, seemed genuinely surprised by the specific nature of this question, acknowledging, after a brief pause, that he had noticed some unusual shortness of breath during particularly demanding training sequences in recent weeks, a detail he had privately attributed to simple overtraining, rather than anything requiring genuine medical attention. Norris later described his own private reaction to this specific question, admitting that he had genuinely not expected anyone to notice or inquire about a symptom he had been privately minimizing for several weeks, understanding, even as he answered honestly, that he had likely been rationalizing away something he privately suspected deserved more serious attention than he had been willing to give it. He said that Lee's specific and unexpected question forced him to confront, in that exact moment and in front of a national television audience, a private concern he had been quietly avoiding, examining too closely in his own daily training routine. Bruce Lee reached across the desk and took Chuck Norris's wrist without warning, his eyes closing in total concentration, and within 3 seconds his expression had shifted from casual conversation to genuine alarm. The studio audience, sensing the specific and unexpected gravity that had suddenly entered the broadcast, went quiet within seconds, several people later describing a sense that something considerably more significant than an ordinary interview exchange was unfolding in front of them. This collective shift in the studio's atmosphere occurred, according to several audience members interviewed afterward, with a specific and unmistakable suddenness. The room's earlier relaxed and appreciative energy giving way almost instantly to a genuine and shared tension as it became increasingly clear that Lee's questions carried considerably more weight than ordinary conversational curiosity. Several people present specifically described watching Norris's own composure shift in response, his easy confidence giving way to visible attentiveness as he registered the genuine seriousness underlying Lee's specific line of questioning. Lee, still holding Norris's wrist, told him directly that his pulse carried a specific irregularity, a particular unevenness that Lee said he recognized from his own extensive training in reading subtle physiological signals, and that this specific pattern, combined with the breathing irregularities Norris had just described, suggested something considerably more serious than ordinary training fatigue. Lee elaborated further, according to the broadcast recording, describing the specific quality of irregularity he had detected with a precision that surprised several physicians who later reviewed the footage, noting a particular unevenness in rhythm that traditional pulse reading traditions specifically associated with cardiac irregularity, rather than the more common and considerably less concerning patterns associated with simple physical exertion or ordinary anxiety. This specific level of diagnostic detail, delivered with genuine confidence rather than vague or general concern, lent Lee's warning a particular credibility that several people present said made it genuinely difficult to dismiss as simple showmanship or exaggerated concern. Johnny Carson, watching this unfold with genuine and evident concern, asked Lee directly what he believed the specific irregularity might indicate. His own considerable experience managing countless unexpected moments across his extensive hosting career gave him, in this exact instance, the specific instinct to prioritize genuine understanding over any consideration of maintaining the broadcast's original planned structure. Lee said, choosing his words carefully, that he was not a physician and could not offer any definitive diagnosis, but that his considerable training in traditional approaches to reading the body's subtle signals suggested a cardiac irregularity that genuinely warranted immediate professional medical evaluation, not the kind of thing to simply monitor or wait out. Chuck Norris, according to everyone present, took this specific warning with genuine seriousness, understanding. From his own considerable respect for Lee's expertise and his own considerable trust in their friendship, that this was not an ordinary or casual observation. This specific trust, according to people who knew both men well, reflected years of genuine mutual respect developed through their shared training and their extensive conversations during the Way of the Dragon production, a foundation that made Norris considerably more willing to take Lee's unconventional diagnostic observation seriously than he might have been had a similar warning come from someone he knew less well or respected less completely. Norris himself later described understanding, in that exact moment, that Lee's own considerable expertise in reading the human body, however unconventional its traditional origins, had earned a level of credibility that made dismissing his warning genuinely difficult to justify. He agreed, on camera, to seek medical evaluation immediately following the broadcast, a promise Lee specifically asked him to confirm directly and publicly, understanding, according to what Lee later told a close friend, that public commitment tended to produce considerably more reliable follow-through than private intention alone. This particular insistence on public accountability, several people who knew Lee well later noted, reflected his own considerable understanding of human psychology and his own genuine determination to ensure that his specific warning actually translated into concrete action, rather than simply being acknowledged in the moment and then quietly set aside once the immediate pressure of the broadcast had passed. The medical evaluation that followed, conducted within days of the broadcast, revealed exactly what Lee's assessment had suggested: a genuine and previously undetected cardiac irregularity that Norris's physicians confirmed required careful and immediate medical management. Norris's own physician, upon completing this specific evaluation, reportedly expressed genuine surprise at the accuracy of Lee's unconventional diagnostic observation, according to an account Norris later shared in interviews, noting that the specific pattern Lee had described matched, with remarkable precision, the actual cardiac irregularity subsequent medical testing eventually confirmed. This alignment between Lee's traditional diagnostic approach and considerably more conventional Western medical testing produced, according to several physicians who later reviewed the case, genuine professional interest in the specific traditional techniques Lee had employed, understanding that regardless of their unconventional cultural origin, they had demonstrated genuine and measurable diagnostic value in this particular instance. Norris's doctors specifically noted, according to an account eventually given by Norris himself in a considerably later interview, that catching this particular condition at this specific stage likely prevented it from progressing into something considerably more dangerous, a genuine medical intervention that may have prevented serious complications Norris might otherwise have experienced during subsequent demanding training or competition. Norris described, in this same later interview, the specific and considerable gratitude he felt reflecting on how differently his own subsequent career and personal life might have unfolded had this particular cardiac irregularity gone undetected for a considerably longer period, particularly given the physically demanding nature of both his competitive martial arts career and his subsequent film work, which frequently required intense physical exertion under circumstances where an undetected cardiac condition might have produced genuinely serious or even life-threatening consequences. The studio audience, 300 people who had come expecting a lighthearted conversation about martial arts choreography, sat in a silence that several people present described as the most genuinely surprised and most genuinely significant silence they experienced at any taping that year, watching one of the most skilled martial artists in the world demonstrate a diagnostic sensitivity that several attending physicians who later reviewed the footage described as genuinely remarkable, regardless of its unconventional origin. Several audience members, interviewed by entertainment reporters in the days following the broadcast, described the specific and unusual privilege of witnessing this particular moment. Several noting that they had come specifically hoping to see demonstrations of martial arts technique and had instead witnessed something considerably more significant, a genuine and unrehearsed demonstration of the deeper physiological understanding underlying elite martial arts practice. One audience member specifically told a reporter that watching Lee's specific and unhesitating intervention gave her a considerably deeper appreciation for the genuine seriousness and genuine expertise underlying a discipline she had previously understood primarily as athletic competition or cinematic entertainment. What followed was a considerably longer and more candid conversation than anyone had anticipated, Lee and Norris discussing, with genuine openness, the specific philosophy underlying Lee's particular approach to reading the human body, and the broader martial arts tradition that connected physical combat training directly to a considerably more holistic understanding of human physiology. Lee spoke, in particular, about the specific traditional teachings that had first introduced him to these diagnostic principles, describing his own considerable study of various historical martial arts texts and his own direct instruction from teachers who emphasized physiological awareness as an essential and inseparable component of genuine combat mastery. Carson listened throughout with genuine and evident fascination, understanding that Lee was offering, in this exact conversation, a considerably more complete and considerably more intellectually rigorous account of martial arts philosophy than audiences typically encountered in ordinary entertainment programming, content that several production staff members later specifically praised as genuinely educational alongside its obvious dramatic significance. NBC's switchboard received an overwhelming volume of calls in the days following the broadcast, viewers writing specifically to describe their genuine fascination with watching this unexpected demonstration unfold, alongside considerable additional interest in the traditional martial arts approaches to physiological awareness that Lee had briefly described. Several of these callers specifically described their own interest in exploring traditional martial arts training beyond simple self-defense application, expressing genuine curiosity about the broader philosophical and physiological dimensions Lee had briefly touched upon during the broadcast. One caller, a practicing physician who had watched the broadcast, wrote to describe his own genuine professional fascination with the specific correlation between Lee's traditional diagnostic approach and the subsequent conventional medical confirmation, suggesting that certain traditional practices, developed over centuries of careful observation, might offer genuine value worth further serious study by conventional Western medicine, rather than being dismissed simply because their origins fell outside standard medical training. This response, echoed across the substantial volume of calls and letters NBC received in the following weeks, suggested that what had happened on that stage had touched something considerably larger than the specific story of one dramatic diagnostic moment, a broader public curiosity about the genuine value that traditional and culturally diverse approaches to human physiology might still offer modern medical understanding. Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris remained close friends for the remainder of Lee's tragically short life. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973, less than a year after that broadcast, and Chuck Norris, in numerous later interviews and in his own published writing, specifically credited Lee not only with fundamentally shaping his martial arts philosophy, but with this particular and genuinely significant intervention, describing it as one of the most remarkable demonstrations of Lee's extraordinary abilities he personally witnessed across their entire friendship. Norris's grief following Lee's unexpected death was, according to people close to him during this period, genuinely profound, compounded by the specific and considerable gratitude he continued to feel toward Lee for the diagnostic intervention that had likely protected his own health and possibly his own life just months earlier. Norris specifically noted, in several later interviews, the particular and painful irony of losing a friend whose extraordinary attentiveness had likely extended Norris's own life, while Lee's own life ended so suddenly and so unexpectedly at only 32 years old, a loss that Norris said he carried with him throughout the remainder of his own considerably long subsequent career. Norris went on to build one of the most successful careers in American martial arts cinema and television across the following decades, frequently referencing his friendship with Lee as one of the most formative influences of his entire professional life. There is one final detail about this story that deserves to be understood, something that connects the entire arc of Lee and Norris's remarkable friendship back to what happened on that Tonight Show stage. Years after Lee's death, when martial arts historians and biographers began examining the full scope of his extraordinary and tragically brief life for various retrospective projects, several specifically identified this particular broadcast as one of the clearest available demonstrations of the genuine depth underlying Lee's own considerable expertise, evidence that his skills extended well beyond cinematic performance into a genuinely rigorous and genuinely valuable understanding of human physiology developed through years of serious traditional study. One historian, examining Lee's broader legacy within martial arts philosophy, noted that this broadcast offered a rare and genuinely significant window into exactly what set Lee apart from many of his contemporaries, a specific and total commitment to understanding the human body that extended considerably beyond simple combat technique into something considerably closer to genuine holistic mastery. If this story moved you tonight, I want you to think about the specific warning signs your own body might be quietly sending you, signals that a busy or distracted life sometimes makes easy to dismiss or rationalize away. Paying genuine attention to those signals, however inconvenient the timing, is very often the difference between minor precaution and genuine crisis. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that genuine friendship sometimes means noticing what someone else has not yet allowed themselves to fully see in their own body. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories about the remarkable friendships behind martial arts cinema's most legendary moments. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and telling me about a time someone's careful attention to your own well-being made a genuine difference in your life. That specific kind of attentiveness, offered without hesitation and without expectation of anything in return, is often the truest measure of what genuine friendship actually looks like in practice.